And who doesn't want that? So today I'm very excited to introduce our guest, Andrea Fryrear. So welcome, Andrea.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, so thanks for joining us. So Andrea is, I've seen her speak at Content Marketing World before, if you've been to any of those Content Marketing Institute events. She's a well-known speaker, author. She's the Chief Content Officer at Fox Content, and what I consider to be the queen of Agile Marketing. So in our session today, Andrea is going to show you how to apply the Agile methodology, which many of us marketers know as what our software development teams use. But why should they have all the fun? Very applicable today in today's world for marketing as well, and for good reason. So Andrea's going to, before I turn it over to her, I'll just introduce myself and our company. So I'm the CEO of Mintent. We are a content marketing platform. So we're cloud software that gives you all of the tools in one spot that you need to plan, produce, publish, and measure all your content. And we fully embrace Agile marketing and are a great platform to manage that for you. So if you like what you see today and you're looking for some software to get started with, you can hit our website and there's a free trial there you can try out. So let's get started now. Let's talk about Agile marketing and why is this important now. This head on desk that you see here is probably an image that we all can relate to. I've been in marketing for 23 years and I love it, absolutely love it, but I know it's getting more and more difficult and more challenging. All of the things we used to do as marketers, we still have to do, plus a whole lot more, and it's getting tougher and tougher. And I think that's because there's this new reality for marketers. Our role within the company has become a much bigger role, a much more important role. It used to be marketing was kind of a sideline to awareness or communications or building funnel, passing leads over to sales, but that's changed. The role's a lot bigger now. Marketers are now driving the entire customer journey and the whole customer experience and the brand awareness, and often own the whole funnel all the way through to closed business, so own the revenue number as well. And marketing is still an art and a science, but there's more and more data in all of our systems, and so it's becoming much easier to measure and quantify. And so executive teams are demanding that marketers show an ROI and show results and show the impact they're having. And so there's the additional pressure of that. Content marketing, which is near and dear to our hearts, and I know Andrea's going to talk to this as well, but it's still the most important differentiator within your marketing mix. Everything you do, your emails and everything you distribute on social and all that comes back to having the right content for the right people, that educates and entertains and everything else. And this is a part of marketing that is not yet automated. Is not, the machines aren't doing this for us. So this still requires us human beings to be creative and smart and be able to write and all of that. And so it's expensive. It's expensive to produce really good content, and it shows. If you see the stats, this is from Forrester Group. Last year in the US, we spent $10 billion producing content. And this year, in 2017, we're going to spend even more. And the results aren't exactly where we want them to be. Content Marketing Institute talks about this a lot, and Forrester talks about this a lot, so does Gartner. That although a lot of marketers surveyed think that they're producing great content, the reader, the person on the other end, that's viewing the content or reading the content doesn't think that the content's all that valuable. So we're spending a lot of money, we're producing a lot of content, and it's not necessarily having the impact that we want it to have. So we need to do something different. We can't just keep managing our marketing teams and managing the marketing process the way we always have. The good news is, well, actually one more note here on technology, because we, clearly for those of you been in marketing, especially the last few years, if you've been to any marketing conferences, you've seen this slide. This is the marketing technology landscape. So when we're building out our marketing technology stacks, or rev tech stacks as they sometimes call it, we have a lot to choose from, and certainly technology has its place, but it's not the silver bullet, that's for sure, because this availability of technology almost makes our lives more complicated, because even just reading all of these vendors, let alone hitting their websites, figuring out what they do, is difficult. So, and it's difficult when this is a chart from Gartner Group, the famous subway map for marketing. And when you have to take something and put it into something that looks like this to simplify it, you've got a problem. So anyway, the good news is Agile marketing is not brand new. It's certainly a newish thing, but there are some teams doing it already, and the initial results are amazing. When you survey companies that have adopted Agile marketing, we see that 3 times are more likely to grow their market share. 80% see an improvement in morale. 93% say Agile helps them switch gears quickly. They become more productive, 87%. 80% prioritize the things that matter. And 93% get their campaigns to market faster. So, I mean, these are all of us would just love to have, these kind of gains. So, I think, Agile marketing is so far proving itself very useful, a great way to adapt to the realities that we now face as marketers. So with that, I'm very excited to turn it over to Andrea, who is going to dive into it for us. So take it away.
Great. And let's show my screen so you can all see these slides. Matt, give me a shout in the chat if the slides aren't working. Otherwise, I'm going to dive in. So hi, everybody. Thanks for being here. As Matt said, there's tons of great benefits to be had from making this shift over to taking a more agile approach to executing marketing work. But, caveat, it's not a simple or a short process. There's quite a lot of complexity that can be encountered as we start down this path. And so I want to spend some time with you unpacking that today. So I think it's very important for us to start off by defining what we mean by agile marketing. And there's a big difference between lowercase a, agile, and capital A, agile. So the lowercase a version is just an adjective, right, to describe the way that most marketers already handle our work right now because we have to. The complexity that Matt was talking about and the increased expectations of our audience and our organizations has forced us to behave this way. We have to be nimble, we have to be responsive, we have to be adaptive. We just have to take in the data and the feedback that we get and adjust the way that we do our marketing based on that incoming information. But to take an actual agile approach is more than just being these adjectives. It's applying a particular methodology to the way we handle our work, choosing a methodology, applying it very systematically and deliberately, and then continuously expanding and improving that over time. And we're going to talk about the 3 most common methodologies today and how you can pick the one that's right for you. It's also a big mindset shift. So Agile does certainly help us get things done faster. It allows us to get things out in front of our audiences more quickly, but it's not just about speed. It's about empowering teams to do really amazing work so that we are getting past that other problem that Matt mentioned, which is that we're doing a lot more content marketing, but it's being less effective. Agile actually helps us get over that hurdle as well by helping us do higher quality work and also preventing burnout on our teams so that we're not continually having to hire new marketers, new content creators to create that content that our audiences want. Agile marketing is also very focused on continuous improvement, both of the process, the Agile process, and the marketing that we're delivering. So going Agile is not something that you put on your to-do list this week and then check off and you're done. It's something that we have to keep coming back to because even teams that have been practicing Agile for years are always finding new ways to improve it. And of course their circumstances change. Team members come and go, the organization changes, priorities shift there are always things that are happening that require us to change and adapt our process, as well as our marketing. When we take an agile approach, we keep going back to the work that we have produced and delivered and seeing what's happening. And we make adjustments as time goes on, so things are rarely ever totally finished or abandoned. And finally, agile marketing committed to adhering to a very particular set of values and principles. So whichever methodology you ultimately choose to implement, at the heart of it should be these values and principles. And we're going to look at just a few. There's actually quite a lot of values and principles to help guide our choices as we run an agile team, but these are a few are most applicable in the marketing context. So an agile team really values individuals and interactions over processes and tools. So it's not that we don't value a good process or a really helpful tool, but when it comes down to making a choice between having a meaningful interaction with an individual, we prefer taking steps to make that happen instead of finding the next shiny new piece of MarTech to implement. Agile teams prefer responding to change over following a plan. Sorry, Megan's telling me that we're skipping out here. Let me adjust my stuff. Okay. Responding to change over following a plan. Rather than make a big long annual plan and stick to it no matter what, we think that it's a competitive advantage to be able to respond to change in nearly real time on an agile team. And likewise, agile teams prefer to run many small experiments rather than having one big marketing campaign that we are committed to for a whole year, and it either fails or succeeds in a really big way. Instead, we run lots of small experiments, and then if a couple of them fail, we're not out very much time or resources, and we can then expand on the successful ones and abandon the ones that were not as successful instead of putting all of our eggs in one big old marketing basket. We also, on an agile team, value our testing and data over opinions and conventions. It's not to say that we don't ever trust our gut or sort of follow our instinct. We do continue to allow that to be part of the conversation, but we're not Don Draper anymore, right? We're not going to have a brainwave and then commit all of our budget to that one brilliant idea when we have so much data available to us and we can run so many types of tests on our marketing, and we can use those results to guide our decision making. Agile teams also place their focus on these intimate customer tribes instead of an impersonal mass market. We want to have these one-on-one conversations whenever possible. And because Agile is so focused on getting great work out the door quickly, then we can create lots of these moments where people feel like we're talking just to them. And it's much more effective than the sort of spray and pray marketing where we would just put out a generic message to every person in the world and hope that it reached the right audience somehow. And finally, agile marketing teams value engagement and transparency over official posturing. And as we hear more and more stories like what's been happening to poor United Airlines, we can see why this is so valuable in the climate that we all have to work in. Customers expect us to be honest and open and transparent with them about what we're doing instead of just giving them some canned brand message that isn't really relevant or based in the reality that we're all experiencing. Okay, so that's a high-level look at some foundational pieces of Agile in general. Now let's transition and talk about the methodologies that we use to put this into practice, to actually manage marketing work on our teams. And there are three flavors that we're going to look at today, so Scrum, Kanban, and scrumban. And you can think of them as flavors of ice cream. There's not really one that's better than another, although I'm sure that we could have a pretty heated debate about which flavor of ice cream is best. But I want to give you a pretty unbiased look at the three of these today because they are all great in their own ways and in their own particular contexts. There is one that I tend to recommend for marketing teams, which I'll tell you about when we get there, but it's very important for us to understand all of these options, because the way that marketers implement Agile tends to be different than the way our predecessors have done it. So if we take a look, for example, at a recent survey that version 1 does every year called State of Agile, they've done this for 10 years, and they are very heavily focused on the IT and software crowd. And you can see that these folks are still very reliant on the Scrum methodology. 58% are using pure Scrum, and then we have another 10% down there using a Scrum Extreme Programming hybrid. But when we ask marketers what type of methodology seems to be working best for them, the results are way different. So Kanban and Lean, which are very similar and could probably be sort of bucketed together if we want to do, are coming in as the clear winners here. And then we have these combination methodologies. Custom hybrids and scrumban are coming in second, and Scrum is last. It has the fewest number of marketers saying that they are using it. And this is from a survey that came out last year. And from my experience, this is pretty accurate. A lot of marketers tend to start out with Scrum because it is the most popular. Certainly if you go and talk to your development team or your IT team and ask them what they're using, they're going to tell you, as we saw on the last slide, they're probably using Scrum. And so marketers often start there. But it may not actually be well suited to their particular context, and they struggle for a couple of months, sometimes as long as 6 months, before they realize it's not exactly what they need and make the transition over to an alternative methodology. So that's why I want to spend some time walking through all three of them today so that you can get a good feel for what's available. So we are going to start with Scrum. It is typically the best known, and this is a common sort of visualization of the Scrum process. So we're going to walk through this and tell you what each one of these pieces means. So we start with a product backlog, and actually all the methodologies that we're going to talk about today are based on a healthy product backlog. So this is the prioritized to-do list that governs all the work that the team does. And stakeholders and marketing leadership and the team, the marketing team, should all work together to keep it nice and up to date so that it's reflective of current priorities and the work that will deliver the most value to the audience and to the business. So the team arrives at a meeting called sprint planning, where they pull a certain amount of work out of this big backlog and turn it into their backlog for the upcoming sprint, which is just a fancy word for the time box, the upcoming amount of time that we've chosen to complete our work in. It can be anywhere from 1 to 4 weeks. Marketers tend to gravitate toward the shorter end of that time scale, so 1 to 2 weeks. But the team is saying, in this case, we have chosen to complete 4 items from our backlog in the next 2 weeks. We believe we can accomplish all of this work within 2 weeks. Also, during this sprint planning meeting, they may size up all that work, estimate how big those pieces of work are in relation to one another. So if each of those is a size 4, let's say, we usually assign them points as opposed to hour sizes, then this team is going to be trying to complete 16 points in the upcoming sprint. And by tracking and estimating things in this way, we can see if the team is improving over time. So if they complete 16 points in this sprint, we would hope that they are periodically doing a little more and a little more. But that's one of the reasons why we take time to estimate in Scrum. So once the team has committed to this amount of work, then the sprint can begin. Ideally, the team is now locked in, and they will only be working on those 4 items for the next 2 weeks. No one should be able to throw additional work onto their shoulders during that time. And they communicate with one another every day during the daily stand-up, which is a 15-minute meeting where we talk about what we did yesterday, what we plan to do today, and any blocks or issues that are standing in our way. If somebody has come to you and said, hey, could you just write this email for me real quick, but that was not part of the sprint backlog, that's something you bring up with the team and talk about whether or not it's worth including or if it should go into the backlog for next time. At the end of your sprint, you should have something potentially releasable. So something that's complete enough that you could send it out to your audience. You don't have to if it's a smaller piece of a larger campaign, but it could be sent out if you so chose. And once the sprint is over, we have 2 meetings, the sprint review, where we sort of show off to everybody, all the stakeholders, what we have completed, and a retrospective, where the team sits down and talks about how the process worked for them. What could they do better next time? What worked really well? And how can they make improvements to things in their next sprint? So Scrum was designed to work in very particular situations. So a Scrum team is ideally about 5 to 7 people, and you can push that a little bit in either direction, but once you start getting outside of 3 or 4 people or bigger than 9 people, then the process can break down pretty badly. It's also best suited for cross-functional teams, which means that the team has all the skills necessary to complete the work from start to finish. They don't need to rely on anybody outside the team to get things done. If you have a team that tends to get interrupted a lot, people are always throwing work over and disrupting what you had expected to get done, then Scrum is a great way to protect the marketing team from having those kinds of interruptions. And Scrum is really awesome if you have an adaptable team. They're up for some change, they're ready to make serious adjustments to how they handle work. Then Scrum could be a great fit for you. So, as you can probably tell, Scrum has very strong feelings about how you should be doing work. And that's okay. Some of us need that guidance. But on the other end of the spectrum is Kanban, which is actually designed to fit on top of the way that you currently do work. So you apply it to your current work, and then you start seeing areas where you could do better, places that you could optimize how things are getting done. And the way that we identify those areas of improvement is to, 1, visualize our workflow. We need to get a clear visual representation of how work actually gets done on the team. Not the way that we hope or wish that it got done or the way that our manager thinks it gets done, but how things actually happen on the team. And an important part of this is to have the right starting and end points for the workflow. So you need to start it where work comes into the team. So if the team gets to choose their work, then that's great, and you can have that included in the flow. But if the team is only going to work on what the CMO tells them to do, then the CMO's decision-making process is outside of the workflow. Same thing for the endpoint. If all of your content has to get reviewed by legal before you can publish it, then you probably don't want to include that legal review as part of your workflow because you don't have control over it. It's going to gum up your whole flow and throw your metrics off. And once you understand what that workflow is going to look like, you map it onto a board using columns. And we'll have a couple of screenshots in a little while that show this on a Trello board, but I'm sure you've seen this type of board. Most Agile teams, and actually quite a lot of people who aren't technically Agile, use this type of visualization thanks to tools like Trello that have made it super easy. But the simplest one is to do, doing, and done. Each of those has a column. For content team, you might have to create, in process, graphic creation, editing, review, publication. Those might be the stages of your workflow. Once you have those stages, then it's time to put limits on how much work can be in each of those stages at any given time. These are known as WIP limits, or work in progress limits. And these are one of my favorite Agile tools. They're super duper powerful because they force you to stop starting a whole bunch of new work and actually start finishing things. And it can be a little bit counterintuitive, but tons and tons of studies have proven that lowering your WIP, so actually having fewer things in process at any given time, actually helps you get more done. You finish more things, and the quality goes up quite a bit too. So each stage of your workflow will have its own WIP limit. And as you start to create these and figure out your initial WIP limits, I always recommend starting higher than you think you need to and working your way down, because this will allow you to get enough work into each state for you to see where things are getting stuck. So if you had only a WIP limit of 1 or 2 on each column, there would be a very small amount of work in the system, and you wouldn't really be able to see where things are getting stuck. So start higher and work your way down so that you can see where the bottlenecks really are. Once you have your board all set up and your WIP limits in place, then you have to figure out the cadences, the schedule for all your various meetings and ceremonies, because Kanban doesn't have set time boxes like Scrum does. And this can be really empowering because the team gets to decide when they plan, when they sit down and have a retrospective, when they release work. All of these things are up to them and based on their unique situation and their own context. But it can be a little intimidating because you have to choose all of that for yourself. But having those cadences set is very, very important. So you need to say we're going to plan our work every week, but we're only going to release completed work every 2 weeks. Then we're going to have a retrospective also every 2 weeks, whatever the best rhythm seems to be for your team. Important note is whatever cadence you choose for all of these different ceremonies, you do still need to have a daily stand-up meeting. That one's not up for debate. Agile teams just work better when everybody huddles up for a short amount of time every single day and communicates with one another how things are going and how we might help one another drive work to completion. Last component of Kanban that we're going to talk about today is creating really explicit policies to govern how work gets done on the team. Most of us have implicit policies, the way that we understand that our work gets done, but oftentimes this is not a shared understanding across the team. So I'm a content creator, I understand how content gets done, but I don't really know how the social media folks are handling their work. But once we get that shared understanding, we have a much better idea of how other people's work is impacting us in a positive or a negative way, and how we might positively impact the work of other people on the team. And these policies help the team understand what work to do first and why. And this saves Kanban teams the trouble of estimating the size of each piece of work that they're going to do, because there are buckets. We put work into a particular bucket, and if it's in bucket A, then we do bucket A first. We can have 4 items of work from this particular bucket in the system at any given time, et cetera, et cetera. There are lots of policies that help us as individual contributors on the team do the right work at the right time without having to stop and ask a manager or go do a lot of fact-finding about each piece of work. It frees us from this need for negotiation with the team as well as with external stakeholders. All right, so Kanban is, again, great in particular contexts. So if you have a team that's already pretty overwhelmed and burned out, and going to them and saying, hey, we're changing all the things about the way that we handle work on our team would just push them over the edge, then maybe try Kanban first, because it's not going to require them to change a whole lot. They'll get some improvements, but they won't have to go through a painful transformation process. If you have a team that falls outside of that Scrum sweet spot, so less than 3 or more than 9, then definitely try Kanban first. If you are in that 5 to 7 range, you can definitely still try Kanban. It'll definitely work in that size team too. It's fantastic for specialized teams. So if you have freelancers or agencies that are contributing to the team's work, then a Kanban system is more flexible and it can adapt to that type of relationship a little more easily than Scrum can. And finally, if you have a skeptical team or some skeptical members of your organization who want some proof that this whole Agile thing is a good idea, then Kanban may be a better place to start because you can apply it right away. You can get up and running with this in just a day or two and then start seeing the benefits right away, as opposed to a Scrum implementation, which is going to require you to do a lot of change before you can actually see some benefit. Okay, so I love this picture. This is the one that I was telling you is really my recommendation for most marketing teams, and this is the hybrid of Scrum and Kanban, hence the name scrumban. So we have the Scrum structure in terms of we run things in a sprint cadence. We have every 2 weeks we release, every 2 weeks we plan, etc. That same structure that tends to make marketing managers and lots of marketers themselves more comfortable because they know when things are going to happen. But we combine that with the really powerful workflow visualization, those Kanban boards that we talked about with their WIP limits. So this eliminates a lot of the stress that Scrum teams often feel. So everybody's super happy and optimistic at the beginning of a sprint, but then by the end everyone's feeling the crunch, feeling stressed out because they're not sure they're going to finish the work that they committed to. And layering a Kanban workflow on top of that, including WIP limits, will help the team steadily complete work throughout the sprint instead of smooshing it all at the end and feeling that crunch. So Scrumban is kind of like getting an awesome buffet. You're walking up to the whole Agile Marketing buffet and you can pick whatever components seem like they're going to work best for you. And then you can put them back if they don't seem like they're working, and you can pick something else and you can make adjustments. You can fiddle with a lot of dials and make a lot of improvements and see some really stellar outcomes pretty quickly. So this kind of implementation is ideal for teams that have the freedom to experiment already. If you're being left alone to manage your workflow in whatever way seems best, then Scrumban is a great place for you to go. Again, like Kanban, if you fall outside of that sort of Scrum sweet spot, but you still want the benefits of the sprint cycle, then Scrumban will get you that, even with a small or large team. If you already have a really stable, fairly high-performing team and you're just looking to take it to the next level, you're looking for some competitive advantage, then Scrumban will get you that. Because like I said, there's a lot of things that you can do, a lot of practices that you can implement quickly to get you to that next level. And again, like Kanban, it's great for specialized teams who are relying on freelancers or agencies or internal groups outside of marketing. If you're reliant on a design team, for example, that isn't part of marketing, then you can incorporate them into a Scrumban flow a little more easily than you could a Scrum implementation. Okay, so once you have figured out which of these methodologies you want to try first, then it's time to start putting it into practice. And the simplest way to get up and running quickly is to just do a physical board. So get a big old whiteboard and a whole bunch of sticky notes and start putting it up on a wall. This is going to give you the freedom to experiment in the early days. You're not going to feel locked in. You can move things around and make adjustments, make notes, make changes, and there's no loss of time. Whereas if you try to put everything into a tool right away, you're going to feel locked in to sticking to the way you put it into the tool because you've put in a lot of time and effort. So try the board first, and then once you have a good understanding of what's working, then you can put it into a digital tool like Trello, Workfront, Jira. Any of these work management systems will probably be workable for an Agile marketing holistic view into all your Agile marketing work. It's also going to give you the data that you need to show how work is moving through the system and where your bottlenecks are and things like that. Of course, within all of that, you are still going to need lots of stuff from that big MarTech landscape that Matt showed us. So things like Mintent, social media management tools like Buffer or Hootsuite, all those things, email automation, all those tools are still going to need to be part of how you execute work on the team, but then they'll be sort of rolled up into this bigger view of the team. And having tools that allow you to execute these pieces of your marketing work that are still compatible with an agile view and an agile values is going to be a big win for you. So let's talk a little bit more in the last 5 or 7 minutes that we have here about how agile principles and practices can apply to content marketing more specifically. This is like my favorite topic in the world. Combining agile and content marketing works so well because content tends to be an iterative process already. We often have a high-performing blog post that we then turn into an ebook, that we then turn into a webinar. This is something that we as content marketers often do anyway. So I want to talk a little bit about best practices here for doing that in a more deliberately agile way. So first and foremost, you have to build a content backlog. So we talked about having a broader marketing backlog, but having one that's specific for content can allow the content team to do work at the right time whenever they have bandwidth available. But when you do this, don't spend a whole lot of time expanding and adding a bunch of detail to every single idea that the team has in the backlog. Focus on the stuff that's coming up next and let the other stuff sit, because it's entirely possible that it won't ever get done. Priorities may change, or something may be not as successful as you expected and then be bumped even further down. You don't want to spend 6 hours creating this first backlog when 80% of it may never actually happen. So once you have a backlog, then it's up to the team to choose their work. And this is important, that they should be the ones who, so the people doing the work are the ones who understand most how long it's actually going to take and which resources are most appropriate. And if you are doing this in a Scrum or a scrumban context, then once they choose the work that they'll be doing in their next sprint, then they should be left alone. No touching the content team while they're off and doing their work. Keeping them protected from external interruptions and allowing them to focus on the work that they've chosen to do is going to keep them from getting burned out. It's going to get you higher quality work that delivers better outcomes, and it's going to help them actually finish work instead of having 10 things in progress at any given time. And once you have this process in place, then you can start really leveraging this agile approach to figure out what the right work is to do at any given time. We're not just producing more and more and more content just for the sake of producing content. We're actually shooting for an opportunity that we see emerging. And agile teams do this much, much better, because instead of creating a big plan, we have our year-long content marketing plan that we're going to stick to no matter what, and shooting for that gray dot there in the middle. But the opportunity moved as we were working. It actually moved to where that blue dot is. And a traditional team misses it. They can't get there. But an agile team, because they release often and in these small chunks, then they are making adjustments as time goes on so that they can actually hit that opportunity. And finally, we want to use the agile process to improve our content continuously over time. And the first way that we do this is in an iterative fashion. So we start out by doing the equivalent of a sketch. We have a basic piece of content that we can release and see what happens. We watch it carefully. How does the audience respond? What kind of business outcomes are we getting? And then as time goes on, we flesh it out. Right? We add more detail, we add more specificity, more functionality. It becomes a more and more beautiful piece of content until ultimately, over time, we have our masterpiece here. We can also use the agile approach to improve incrementally, so expanding on a particularly successful piece of content. And so this would be, we release a blog post and we get tons of social shares, tons of comments. This is clearly resonating with our audience, so we want to do more with that. We incrementally improve it. So the next sprint, we can create a webinar about it. And then the following sprint, we have an ebook. And then the following sprint, we incorporate it into our email nurture campaign. Whatever the best use of the team's time is, we will be able to expand that very, very rapidly based on some data that we collected, instead of having to wait until the next quarter's planning meeting to incorporate these learnings and these outcomes that we saw. So those are some specific best practices around content. And I do want to encourage you to learn more about Agile marketing, start figuring out how to make it work on your team, because unfortunately, if you don't, this Google Trends chart here seems to indicate that one of your competitors may be doing it already. This is, like Matt said, it's growing very rapidly in popularity. More and more people are implementing it. So the early adopter window is still open, and there's a lot of advantage to be gained by making this leap now, but the window may not be open forever. As of last year, 30% of marketers who were surveyed said that they were already using some kind of Agile work methodology. And so the time is now to make this switch and take a more Agile approach to your work. And we're going to take some questions now if you have questions, but if you want more specific discussion, feel free to email me. There's my email. Certainly Matt would be happy to chat more, I'm sure, about how Mintent can make this work for you. And then I guess we have some questions that we're going to get.
Yeah, sounds good. So can you hear me okay?
Yes.
I'm off of mute. Okay, great. Awesome. So just a reminder, we are going to send out Andrea's ebook to everybody, and that's a great resource to go through. I mean, obviously we were only able to touch on each of the three methodologies higher level, but certainly we have all the resources you need. So with that question, what's the next step? Somebody saw what they liked here and wants to know specifically what they do next to get started. What would you recommend, Andrea?
Yeah, I mean, the ebook, like you said, that we're sending out does have a lot more detail, and I would encourage you to learn more about your chosen methodology, because we like barely scratched the surface today. There's a lot more to learn about each one. So pick the best one, learn a little bit more, and then jump in. You can run a couple of experiments, start running your content team, for example, just using Agile, and then let the rest of the team continue on. If you're not ready to do a whole big department-wide transformation, you can always sort of get a pilot program going. That's kind of a low-risk way to start, too.
Okay, great. And another question here, and I was curious about this myself because we have some agencies and that are customers. So does this work for agencies as well?
Definitely works for agencies. It's actually a pretty nice fit. It allows the agency itself to better allocate resources because they know exactly what everyone's going to be working on and how much they've committed to as an organization. And it also is great for their clients because when they come on board, an Agile agency can say, your contract entitles you to this many points every month. So how do you want to spend those points? And gives them sort of a flexible look into what the agency might be able to do for them. And the agencies that I've spoken with that have done this successfully have had outstanding results in terms of client retention and satisfaction, and then their own internal employees are just so much more happy. They're less burned out. It's a really great fit.
Okay, great. Okay, a few more questions are coming in here. So one is I know there's there is a lot of Agile training out there for like Scrum Master and stuff that developers take. Would you recommend that a marketer go through one of those courses or take something separate?
Yeah, I mean, you can. Certainly if you feel like Scrum is the right approach, it may be beneficial to have a trained Scrum Master on the team. I've gone through Scrum Master and Product Owner trainings myself. They are still very centered on software development. So if you have the opportunity to let the instructor know in advance that you're coming and you're a marketer, they might be able to tailor things for you a little bit. There's also quite a few Agile marketing leaders, including myself, who are getting together and coming up with some shared curricula for the trainings that we're offering. So if that's something that people are interested in, please shoot me an email and I can send you schedules and locations for where some Agile trainings that are specifically tailored for marketers are happening.
Great. Okay, and there's another question here. So the question is, what's the best way to implement a workflow in a less than 3-person environment where ad hoc projects are a daily occurrence? So I guess this is sort of a two-part question, because I was wondering about the ad hoc nature as well. Those always seem to be the reality for marketers.
Yeah.
You can't always add them, say, sorry, you can wait in 2 weeks. It's a sales presentation for tomorrow. Do you reserve a certain number of points for that, or you just in your daily huddle reprioritize, or how do you kind of handle the ad hoc stuff?
Yeah, so that situation that this person is describing, to me, that's the ideal kanban situation right there. You have a small team with ad hoc work coming in, totally a perfect fit for kanban, because you can create buckets for ad hoc work. So if it is something that is a true emergency that requires the team to drop everything and get it done, then you can create policies for how that work is going to be handled. So if that work comes in, then the first qualified resource who's available drops their projects, finishes this emergency work before they move on to anything else. But then you can also create rules for we're only allowed to have one emergency piece in the flow at any given time. So if there's one in progress and another one comes in, you can say, like, I'm sorry, we're doing one right now, you're going to have to wait till that one's finished. And if you do have a lot of ad hoc work, I would say totally get visibility into your workflow as broadly spread out across the organization as you can. So people who are sending that ad hoc work to you can see what it's doing. They can see how it's impacting the other work that would have been done, and they can also see what other people have thrown at you, so they can get a lot of visibility into what's really going on.
Yeah, yeah. No, we see our customers sometimes using a field and flagging that as a type of content, priority 1, 2, or 3, and then they can look at their calendar and see, how things are, how much they have of each of those kinds. So, okay, cool. Next question here: any specific case studies we can send the link out that have adopted these methodologies?
Yes, absolutely. There are a couple. So I've been collecting these. My website is theagilemarketer.net, and we can, in the follow-up email, we can include some links to those directly. But there's a really great one that we just published a couple of weeks ago about an agency who's done this, and then all kinds of marketing departments have made this happen. I have some on my website. Jim Ewell is another marketing leader who's been in Agile for a long time, and he's got several collected on his website, which is agilemarketing.net. So between the two of those, you should be able to find some that are very, very like your situation, hopefully, and will apply to you.
Great. Another question here: do you recommend using time estimation or point system for estimation of resources? When I look at the point system, it seems to add complexity. If I consider that, what are the benefits?
Yeah, I mean, estimation can be an unnecessary complication for marketing teams. The benefit of it is that it gets you a look into how the team is performing over time. So if we normally complete 12 points and then all of a sudden we did 8 or 6 or 4, then we need to stop and say, okay, what happened? Why did that happen? How can we prevent this in the future? And I would say if you can stick to points as opposed to time, hours are notoriously inaccurate and difficult to get right. So points kind of bypass that a little bit, especially if you use something like Fibonacci, which is like the 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, and so there's more difference between the points as opposed to just 1, 2, 3, 4. So yeah, I mean, estimation, I go back and forth. It's really going to depend on your context and what the points are getting you. If you feel like they're providing you useful information, keep doing it. If it's just a waste of time, then stop and see what happens. Run it as an experiment and see what the benefits are.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, okay. A question on copy, or sorry, content. The 2 week sprints you mentioned, do they just include copy creation, or does it also include design and approvals?
No, you should be doing all that sort of stuff simultaneously. So if you split it up, you're really just running sort of mini waterfall there, um, and you're going to be delaying the release of your content unnecessarily. So you don't always have to be necessarily doing copy, design, and approval on the exact same piece of content, but if you can plan appropriately, so maybe you're doing design for piece 1, copy for piece 2, and approval for piece 3, all in a single sprint. And then doing it that way is going to allow you to have something finished at the end of every iteration, as opposed to having to wait 3 sprints. So you had to do sprint 1 for design, sprint 2 for copy, and sprint 3 for approval. Then you've delayed that release a long time, and that's counter to that release early, release often value that Agile teams are striving for.
Perfect. And that was not a planted question, by the way, but that is a perfect application for an editorial calendar. Okay, how do you recommend I transition from Scrum to trying scrumban? Scrumban? What would the process look like?
So that's a pretty straightforward transition. If you're already running sprints on your team, then it's going to be a matter of just pulling in those workflow visualizations. Chances are you've already got a board of some kind. So start adding in WIP limits and start deciding whether or not your estimation is appropriate, or if you would rather move to work item types, those project types that we talked about for Kanban. You can replace Scrum estimation with those in a scrumban team if that seems to be getting you the same benefits. You can also start playing around with changing up the ceremony cadences. So maybe every 2 sprints you do a retro, or you only plan every 2 sprints. You can start sort of breaking free of some of those strictures by at least having some additional Agile processes to incorporate.
Okay, great. Okay, well, why don't we wrap it up there? We're having a tiny bit of drop off here at the end, but not much. I mean, people were interested in these questions, so we'd love your feedback. This is first of many. We're doing a whole webinar series. We're bringing the best marketers in the world, like Andrea, to our series to talk about these kind of topics that matter to marketers. So we're going to send out a link to the recording, Andrea's ebook, and of course, if you want to try our software to see if it would work for you, there is a free trial on our website. So hit www.getmintent.com and you can sign up there. So thank you very much, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and look forward to seeing you on our future webinar. And Andrea, thank you so much for your contribution today. This has just been fantastic.
Always a pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.